The science fiction writer Robert A. Heinlein, in his 1961 book, Stranger in a Strange Land, invites us to imagine that a highly rational and logical Martian named Mike comes to Earth and tries to understand our culture. What humans call humor puzzles the Martian. He struggles to understand why we think things are funny. One day, Mike is walking through a zoo with his friend Jill, and they stand in front of a monkey cage. They watch the monkeys eat and sleep, court, nurse, groom, and swarm aimlessly around, while Jill tosses them peanuts. She tosses one peanut to a monkey, but before he can eat it, a large male not only steals the peanut, but gives the monkey a beating. The little fellow did not try to pursue his tormentor. He pounded his knuckles against the floor and chattered in helpless rage. Mike watched all this solemnly. The mistreated monkey rushed across the cage, picked a still smaller monkey, bowling it over and giving it a beating worse than the one he had suffered. The third monkey crawled away, whimpering. The other monkeys paid no attention. Suddenly, Mike, the Martian, threw back his head and laughed, and went on laughing uncontrollably. It was a breakthrough moment in the story because Mike had never laughed before. Well, Jill took Mike home and he became quiet, but he continued to chuckle, laughing aloud, chuckling again while she wiped his eyes. Finally, Jill said, "Mike, what happened?" He said to Jill, "Tell me a joke I've never heard and see if I laugh at the right place." "I will, I'm sure of it. And I will tell you why it's funny. I have found out why people laugh. They laugh because it hurts, because it's the only thing that will make it stop hurting." Jill looked puzzled, and Mike, the rational Martian, tried to explain. He said to Jill, "You understand it so automatically that you do not have to think about it because you grew up with people, but I didn't. I've been like a puppy raised apart from dogs, and I've never learned how to be a dog. So I had to learn. Today, I got my diploma, and I laughed." That poor little monkey. Jill was still puzzled. "Which monkey was funny?" she asked. "I thought the big one was just mean, and the one I flipped a peanut to turned out to be just as mean. There certainly was not anything funny." Mike explained. "Of course it was not funny, it was tragic. That's why I had to laugh. I looked at a cage full of monkeys and suddenly I saw all the mean and cruel and utterly unexplainable things I have seen and heard and read about in the time I have been here on Earth. And suddenly it hurt so much, I found myself laughing." "But," Jill protested, "laughing is what you do when something is nice, not when it's horrid." Mike responded, "Find me something that makes you laugh, a joke, anything, but something that gives you a belly laugh, not a smile. Then we'll see if there isn't a wrongness somewhere, and whether you would laugh if the wrongness wasn't there. I had thought, Mike said, that a funny thing is a thing of goodness, but it's not. The goodness is in the laughing. I understand it's bravery and sharing against pain and sorrow and defeat. Death, for example. Jill again protested. Death is not funny. Then why are there so many jokes about death? Jill, with humans, death is so sad that we must laugh at it. All those religions contradict each other on every other point, but each religion is filled with ways to help people be brave enough to laugh. Let's sing Spirit of Life. In 2001, a British research group at the University of Hertfordshire set out to discover the world's funniest joke. Now, more than 300,000 people from around the world visited an internet website called Laugh Lab, where they submitted 40,000 jokes and they rated other people's submissions. Now, they were able to ask people to identify whether they were adults or children and see, for example, what children rated as the world's funniest joke. And there were a couple that came out that I remember. One is a teacher is standing before a classroom and she says to her students, everyone in this class who thinks they're stupid, stand up. There's a long pause and finally Johnny stands up. And the teacher looks at Johnny and says, Johnny, you think you're stupid? And he says, well, no, but you were standing there all by yourself. Man comes home from work and he looks across the yard at the next house and he sees Billy digging a hole. And he says, hey, Billy, what are you digging the hole for? And Billy says, well, my pet bird died. Oh, I'm sorry. So you're gonna bury it? Yeah. It's an awfully big hole, though, to bury a pet bird in. Well, he's inside your cat. Today is the day before Memorial Day. It is a time to visit cemeteries and put flowers or a flag on a tombstone or for a relative or a friend. And indeed, if I lived in Lexington, North Carolina, I would visit the grave of Woolrich Fritz, my great grandfather, who fought in the American Revolution and was one of 2 farmer soldiers murdered in 1781 by a band of British sympathizers. His epitaph in a church courtyard in Lexington, North Carolina reads, erected to the memory of 2 courageous patriots of the Revolution. Over the years, I've visited gravesides. I've officiated at graveside services in many places, in Idaho and Arizona, in Kentucky, in Massachusetts, in Illinois and Maryland, in Florida, and also at Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia. When the ritual of the graveside service is over, I often take a few minutes to walk among the stones and read the inscriptions. And I've discovered that there are whole books that contain collections of epitaphs. Reading them helps me achieve a better understanding of myself. The words have helped me to comprehend who I am, where I have come from, and what I am becoming. And some of these epitaphs remind me to keep my sense of humor. Even the most sacred and tragic experiences can be objects of humor. Some are poetry with subtle humor, a quiet laugh. This poem appeared on a stone in Boston. Here I lie, bereft of breath, because a cough carried me off. Then a coffin they carried me in off. These are subtle poems. In New York, this is on a tombstone. Underneath this pile of stones lies all that's left of Sally Jones. Her name was Lord. It was not Jones, but Jones was used to rhyme with stones. And this one, here lies Joyce. She had rather not, but has no choice. Now, the best definition of humor I've ever found is in the Encyclopedia Britannica. It's an excellent essay. The writer said, there is a bewildering variety of moods involved in different forms of humor. But whatever the mixture, it must contain one basic and indispensable ingredient, an impulse, however faint, of aggression, apprehension, or even malice. Sometimes the aggressiveness in humor is obvious, as in children's practical jokes or in the pratfalls of adults. At other times, the aggression may be more subtle, as when a pun suddenly makes an earnest conversation appear ridiculous. The elements of aggression and apprehension are so universally common in humor that some writers have theorized that its function is to discharge these emotions of aggression in a socially acceptable manner. In a Vermont graveyard are these words: she lived with her husband for 50 years and died in confident hope of a better life. And another reads, beneath this stone my wife doth lie, now she's at rest, and so am I. But sometimes the wife gets the last word. A widow left this epitaph at her husband's grave. Sacred to the memory of my husband, John Barnes, who died January 3rd, 1803. His commonly young widow, age 23, has many qualifications of a good wife and yearns to be comforted. Another good definition of humor is by Charlie Chaplin. He wrote, the theme of life is conflict and pain. Humor is the subtle discrepancy we discern in what appears to be normal behavior. Through humor, we see in what seems rational, the irrational. In what seems important, the unimportant. Humor heightens our sense of survival and preserves our sanity. We must laugh in the face of our helplessness or go insane. In a Burlington, Massachusetts courtyard are these words: "Here lies the body of Mary Ann Lauder. She burst while drinking a Sidslitz powder, called from this world to her heavenly rest. She should have waited till it effervesced." The grave in Girard, Pennsylvania reads, "Ellen Shannon, who was fatally burned March 21st, 1870, by the explosion of a lamp filled with R.E. Danforth's non-explosive burning fluid." Or in Oxford, New Hampshire, "To all my friends I bid adieu. A more sudden death you never knew. As I was leading the old mare to drink, she kicked me and killed me quicker than a wink." Or a Uniontown, Pennsylvania cemetery, "Here lies the body of Jonathan Blake. He stepped on the gas instead of the brake." Or a marker in Vermont, "Here lies the body of our Anna, done to death by a banana. It wasn't the fruit that laid her low, but the skin of the thing that made her go." Some famous people have a sense of humor when it comes to their epitaph. Ernest Hemingway said, "Pardon me for not getting up." George Bernard Shaw, "I knew if I stayed around long enough, something like this would happen." On Frank Sinatra's grave are carved the words of the song, "The best is yet to come." Mel Blanc was the TV voice of the cartoon character Porky Pig. On his tombstone are the words, "That's all, folks." The Chicago writer Studs Terkel chose as his epitaph, "Curiosity did not kill this cat." The stone over the body of TV personality Merv Griffin says, "I will not be right back after this message." And Dorothy Parker's ashes rest beneath the pines of the NAACP headquarters in Baltimore. On a marker appears the epitaph she suggested. 3 words she chose were, "Excuse my dust." Now, many inscriptions are a play on words. In 1974, a man in West Virginia asked his family to cremate his remains after his death, and he left instructions that his epitaph should say, "I made an ash of myself." Or consider a marker in a New Mexico cemetery. "Here lies Johnny Yeast. Pardon me for not rising." A cemetery in Hartscombe, England, are these words, "On the 22nd of June, Jonathan Fiddle went out of tune." These words are on the grave marker of a businessman in Covington, Virginia. "I made a lot of deals in my lifetime, but I sure went in the hole on this one." If a coal miner's epitaph is "Gone underground for good. A dentist's epitaph is filling his last cavity. And a gardener's epitaph is transplanted. What's the appropriate epitaph for a Unitarian Universalist minister? Perhaps it should say on my headstone, gone in search of a discussion about heaven. Whatever we decide on for the words that sum up our life, we should be careful to have it proofread before the stone carving begins. If we do not, we could end up with an epitaph like the one created by the Scottish friends of a man named John McFarlane. Erected to the memory of John McFarlane, drowned in the water of Leith by a few affectionate friends. The popularity of the epitaph, of course, has faded during the 20th century. Gravestone carving costs have increased. A charge per letter has become common, making the cost of long inscriptions prohibited for many. These reasons and others have resulted in a decrease in the number of epitaphs. And today, many of us request that our ashes be scattered in the ocean. One woman left instructions that these words be said on the boat as her ashes were scattered. Over the side, without a long speech, hope she goes out and not up on the beach. Of course, some churchyards still have cemeteries, even some older Unitarian Universalist churchyards. The story is told of a Unitarian Universalist minister who tossed and turned all night. He was unable to sleep. He felt like God was trying to tell him something. He served an old wooden New England church with a cemetery on the church grounds. When he got up that morning, it was clear and it was bright. However, the small wooden chapel, the small church amidst the tombstones, looked very shabby. He realized God had been trying to tell him that the church needed a new coat of paint. With the resolve of that message, he rummaged through the church basement, but he could only find one can of white exterior water-based paint. He thought, if I thin the heck out of it, I could stretch it to cover the whole church. It's not a very big church. So he went to work. He painted through lunch and finished just as the sun was setting. The last drop of paint covered the last part of the wall. When he was done, he climbed down from the ladder and he looked at his work. He was very pleased. Suddenly, a small, dark thundercloud appeared out of the cloudless sky and settled over the church. It sent down a torrent of rain that soaked him and washed all the new paint off the church walls. All his work was washed away. The minister looked up incredulously at the cloud, from which came a booming voice that said, "Repaint and thin no more."